Welcome. I'm so glad to see everyone here since we did not meet in July. It's a shame that we have one of the hottest weeks leading into this that we've had all summer, but we'll survive. As is our custom, we will begin the meeting with a reading of the Mended Hearts Prayer. There should be a copy close to your seat. We ask for your blessings, Lord. We ask for strength that we may pass it on to others. We ask for faith that we may give hope to others. We ask for health that we may encourage others. We ask, Lord, for wisdom that we may use all your gifts well. We have some visitors with us this evening that I'd like to recognize. This gentleman in the corner over here is Mr. Scott Davis, and he is here from a recommendation from his cardiologist, and I got his permission for him to tell you a little bit about his journey.
Thank you all for having me here. This was a big shock in my life. It's been 5 weeks since the surgery, and I know there's big changes coming up in my life, and I have lots of questions on things that I may come about from here on out. But while I was in surgery, my kids were visited by somebody in a nice red vest, and they were very impressed. I didn't get the person's name, but I am here because of their interaction with my children, and I'm looking forward to meeting all of you and hearing what you may have to say.
Well, we're certainly glad to have you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Lenore, you want to introduce your guest?
Yes. This is Mavis Asada, and she is a dear friend of mine. She's a dear friend of mine, and I invited her to attend Mended Hearts to find out more about nutrition and food choices and how to treat your heart before it becomes a problem. And about a couple months ago, we were involved in business, but her son, who is an athlete in his 20s, had a slight heart event, and we directed her to one of the doctors, Kabadia, and she got some direction. So I've encouraged her to stay on top of, heart, eating, and all of that kind of thing. So she's here with us tonight.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you.
We welcome you.
Thank you.
Like anyone else that is visiting with us? You've been here before.
She's mine.
That's what I thought, because she's been
Dina, yeah.
she's been here before,
Yeah.
so we don't consider her new. She's regular.
Old new.
Yeah. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce a speaker that we are already familiar with, but we enjoyed her presentation a few months ago, and she has agreed to come back and add to the information that she gave us in her first talk to the Mended Hearts. Pam, is it Speich? Speich, yeah. She is the Director for Outpatient Nutrition at Chippenham Hospital, a registered dietitian as well, and she works with the cardiac rehab patients and also teaches nutrition classes. Her background includes work as a pediatric dietitian, grocery store nutritionist, labeling specialist, and fitness dietitian. Well, I can use every skill that you have here. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Pam to the podium, and it's all yours. Thank you, Pam.
I know if you guys read the email, I'm not talking about gut health. I think it went out that I was going to talk about gut health tonight, but I'm not. I'm going to talk about flavor and how, basically how we make our food decisions and how flavor is a big part of that. So I do have some handouts for you all, but before I pass them out, I want you to stop and think a little bit about what are some of the things that cause you to make your food decisions. anybody want to throw out?
Well, flavor has a lot to do with
Yeah,
it.
so flavor definitely, if it tastes bad, you're probably not gonna eat it, right? That's definitely, yeah, so flavor, and that's what we're gonna focus on, but what are some other things that
Girlfriend.
impact? What's that?
Girlfriend.
Yeah, you got family or friends, there's people around you that influence you. You know, when you think about when you're sick and you think of comfort foods, you might think back to whatever your mom gave you when you were sick as a kid,
No, I
you
said
know?
girlfriend.
Yeah, girlfriend.
That's what I said. I didn't say mother.
Yeah, well, that's part, like, relationships, you know, so it can be your mother, it can be your girlfriend, it can be your wife, it could be,
Oh, shut up.
yeah. Is she making you eat what you need to eat?
No, I don't listen to her.
Sometimes our relationships make us not want to eat certain foods too. You know, sometimes you're good with eating it until your spouse tells you you need to. And then you're like, you can't tell me what to do, right? So sometimes that can happen too. What else impacts what you eat? Yes?
Texture.
Texture, yeah, texture. And obviously, like, if you have any dental issues, what you can chew, you know, if you get to a point where you don't have all your teeth or things are changing in your mouth, sometimes that can impact what you eat as well. Education, go on.
It also depends on what part of the country you're from too.
Yes, and different parts of the country can have different flavors and things that they like. Hunger is a really big factor in food, right? What were you going to say, Tommy?
I was going to say what influences me, and I can't say that I eat perfect by any means, but when I see the scar,
Okay,
that
yeah.
influences my decisions on most of the food I eat.
Yeah, medical diagnosis can influence what you eat. My best friend's daughter has celiac disease, so she can't have any gluten, and her son has type 1 diabetes. So just imagine that household and all the food decisions and all the medical parts of making those food decisions. So we're influenced a lot by, you know, what we eat is more complex than what you might think. I do think hunger is also a huge driving force. You know, when you're hungry, almost anything tastes good. A lot of times people starve themselves all day and then, you know, wonder why they overeat at night. You know, it's because you didn't eat enough today. You know, you were actually hungry. So hunger can really impact the food choices we make it as well. But today I want to focus on taste and how taste and flavor impacts our decisions, and how we also have to consider the impact that two specific taste has on our heart, especially when you're told now you have to watch out for certain tastes and flavors that you liked before. So the 5 basic tastes, the purpose of taste is basically to give us messages about what we should and shouldn't eat. Do y'all know the 5 basic tastes? Does anybody want to shout out if you know what they are?
Salty.
Sweet.
Salty. So what do you think the purpose of salty is? We generally like salty foods. What would be a reason why we might like salty foods?
Adds to the flavor, adds to the
Yeah.
taste.
Yeah, but salt is also an essential mineral for our body. We have to have some salt. So we are drawn to like salty foods because there is a minimum amount that we need. You know, we don't need as much as we get today. But salt, we like salt, and salt ensures that we have enough intake of sodium, and it also regulates how much water we have in the body. So we generally like salty flavors. What else?
Sweet.
Fat.
Sweet. Yeah, so sweetness. We love the sweet flavor. And believe it or not, sweetness is also a flavor that we really like because sweet things have sugar in it, and sugar is carbs, right? Carbs is energy. So we like sweet things because it ensures our body gets the glucose and the energy it needs to do things. You know, the problem again is when we get too much or too much of the wrong kind. What are the other 3 tastes? Sour, exactly. So sour is one of those tastes that helps keep us from taking in toxic substances. It also can be used to determine if like a fruit is ripe enough, right? Because before it's ripe, it might be a little bit sour and you might be like, ooh, that's not good yet, you know? And we wait till it sweetens up. So we have some tastes that we're drawn to because they have a benefit for the body, and other tastes help prevent us from eating things that might be harmful. Any other tastes you can think of?
How about umami?
Umami, that's That's the newest flavor. You might have learned there was only 4 tastes. Now there's 5. Umami is a flavor that you get basically when you sit down and you have a good piece of steak, right? That just wonderful feeling of usually protein, delicious protein in your mouth. Umami, they say now, ensures that you have an adequate intake of protein for proper growth and maintenance of your body. You know, when you're healing from something, you need more protein. When you're growing, you need more protein. So umami, we're drawn to things with protein for that flavor and for that reason for our body. There's one more. Can y'all think of one more
Hot
flavor?
pepper.
Hot pepper. Spicy.
Acidic.
Bitter. Bitter would be the last one. Now, I'm sure there's more flavors than that, but we're just going basic here. So bitter is to prevent us from ingesting poisonous substances in the body. So when you have, you know, bitter leaves and bitter things that you, oh, that's toxic, that's poisonous. So obviously the flavors that we are kind of designed to want is salty, sweet,
Sour.
and umami. And
Sour.
sour could be a mix, you know, Sour Patch Kids. Usually those sour you can only tolerate in very small amounts. You can't have too much sour, you know, like, I don't know if anybody ever did the grapefruit diet or the pineapple diet. I feel like pineapple can be a little bit sour. My grandmother did that, and she actually like ruined the whole inside of her mouth from like all the acid that was in that diet. So, I mean, that was a long time ago, but that was a story.
And you mentioned grapefruit. That is the one thing that they told me following my heart surgery, positively do not eat grapefruit.
That is correct. If you are taking a statin, grapefruit will prevent your statin from doing its job. So you do not want to. And I've had people come and tell me I'm on cholesterol medicine and it's not working. And then when I do the diet recall, I find out that they're taking their cholesterol medication with grapefruit juice. And I'm like, well, you can't take that with grapefruit juice. So if you didn't know it, no grapefruit if you're on a statin for lowering cholesterol.
But it does interfere with a lot of other medications also, grapefruit.
In mine, yeah. I don't know all of that stuff though.
What about orange juice?
You can take orange juice.
It's not as acidic as grapefruit.
Yeah, it's not the same. There's
No one
not
told me that because I'm a grapefruit fanatic, so I guess I gotta change that.
Yeah, to have an orange instead. And orange is good for lowering cholesterol too. So do an orange instead. Okay, so the other thing to think about with our taste is our tastes change over time. I don't know if you knew this, but babies are born with 30,000 taste buds in their mouth. In comparison, adults have 8,000 to 10,000. So when you see that baby make that face, when they put that thing in their mouth, and you're like, wow, what a dramatic facial expression, they are really tasting the food. I don't know if you think back when you were a kid and how much you hated vegetables. You know, like they just didn't taste good. They've kind of made you, ugh. Well, guess what? You had more taste buds in your mouth then. And so everything was more potent and more powerful when you're younger. And I think we have to remember that sometimes, the parents, you have to remember that with their kids. Like, yeah, they may not like vegetables because they taste them way more than we do. Like, I know a lot of adults that don't like vegetables. So keep in mind your taste buds, the number of taste buds you have diminishes over time. And the other thing to think about is that taste, people can develop new tastes and preferences as they get older. How many of y'all have made a conscious effort to cut back on salt in your diet? And how many of you have gone back to having something salty you used to love and then found it to be too salty? Has anybody experienced that? So that is an experience of taste changing. When I work with clients in cardiac rehab, it's also very common for people to be drinking whole milk, which has nothing to do with sodium or anything, but whole milk has a lot of saturated fat. And the thought of having skim milk or 1% milk is like, I could never do that, you know? But if you get used to it, like a skim milk drinker does, you go back to whole milk and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much coating on my throat from that fat, you know, like it's a different feeling and you can get used to new tastes and new preferences. I also like to use the example of like coffee drinkers. Like when I was a kid, I hated coffee. I can't live without it now. It is, you know, same thing with wine. You know, alcohol, like, ugh, why would anybody drink that as a kid? And then you go to college and you find out, why do people drink those drinks, right? So our tastes change, and the thing that is key to remembering that your taste changes, it's all about exposure and trying it again and again and again. The more you try something, the more likely you will eventually accept it. And so just because you hate Brussels sprouts doesn't mean if you go to Taz's Kitchen and have their appetizer Brussels sprouts, which is not necessarily healthy but is so delicious, it may change your thoughts about Brussels sprouts, and then you might be able to incorporate it in a new way. So just remember, taste and people can develop new tastes and preferences, and the key is exposure and repetition. The other thing to keep in mind is our taste is impacted a lot of times by different things. I often find after surgery, when I'm working with somebody, one of the things they'll say is food doesn't taste the same to me now. It doesn't taste as good as it did. I know taste can be also impacted by medications. Have you ever had a medication and it maybe made things taste not so good anymore, and you're like, well, I love this food. It's so disappointing. I was a very strict gluten-free diet for about 4 years when my son was dealing with some gluten intolerance. So I just dove in, and I thought, well, I didn't dive in. I actually resisted it for a really long time. And anyways, then I dove in and I embraced it, and I went gluten-free too, and I missed wheat thins because I love wheat thins. Like, I just missed them. And I would see my husband and my other kids eating wheat thins, but Timothy couldn't have them, so I didn't eat them. So after 4 years, I had wheat thins for the first time. I swear they changed that recipe in that time. They did not taste the same. I did not like them as much. I have since grown to love them again because I have repetition, but it is really interesting to see how taste can be impacted by different things. How about COVID? Anybody know somebody who lose their taste during COVID? Taste, smell, and taste. Some people, I mean, you might, I'm not asking if you did. I don't want anybody saying, I will say I did have COVID last summer. I did not lose my smell or my taste. I would have liked to have lost some of my sense of smell because I have 3 boys and a husband and a dog, and sometimes my house stinks. But my neighbor's son did, and it was like eating pizza without being able to taste it. Just sounded gross to me. Like when I stop and think about how that would feel in my mouth without being actually able to taste the flavors. So there were a lot of things he just didn't like eating because they didn't taste good. And so obviously taste is really important when it comes to what we choose to eat and not eat. So with that being said, I'm going to dive right in and first talk about salt and salt. Because when you have a heart issue, I can walk around and pass it. Is that okay for me to walk around?
It's okay.
Okay. Because when you have, and I'll just say, like, take one and pass it down, I'll go around. When you have a heart condition, take one and just pass it down, and then I'll collect them back, just to keep them moving. You're often told you need to pass them down. You're often told that you need to limit your sodium intake, right? And that's hard to do if y'all want to pass them down. There's several there. And there's several different handouts. Who knows what the guidelines for sodium, how much sodium you're allowed to have in a day? Does anybody know that? 2,000 milligrams. That's for heart health. 2,000 milligrams is the recommendation. Now, general healthy guidelines are 2,300 milligrams. Okay?
Of salt.
Of salt. Of sodium. Not salt, sodium. Yeah. Who knows how much sodium the average American consumes?
Oh, there's one for John.
How much?
I didn't hear what you said.
42.
You have that?
How much sodium do most
4,200.
Americans get on average?
Double.
I'm just gonna put it all down here now.
Double the daily amount.
Probably at least twice that.
Yeah.
We'll go this way. Are there extras somewhere?
4,200.
Oh, you ran out?
What is that?
Okay. Well, I'll just collect the extras later. You guys. Are these some extras? Is that the
There you
one?
go. Pass it on.
Oh, I need it. You got that? Okay. Is these extras? Did you get one of those? Yeah, there should be 2. Oh, I see. Okay. We had to leave it down that one. Oh, no, it doesn't. one that is all about salt substitutes, and one that is a lower sodium shopping guide.
Do that one.
It's on its way down, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right here.
Yes.
These, I can give those back.
I learned it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. There's the other one. There's the other one. But these are the other ones. Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right. You can one, yes. All right, does everybody have all three? Okay, perfect. All right, so if you want to start with the lower sodium shopping guide, just at the very beginning, it'll give you some statistics about, or some recommendations regarding sodium. So sodium is a mineral that's found naturally in certain foods, but is also used in preserving foods and used for bringing out flavors of foods. And like we just talked about, we're inclined to like salty things because it helps make sure we get enough salt in our body to regulate fluid volume and stuff. The challenge with sodium is if you get too much, it causes you to retain too much water, which can raise your blood pressure and cause all sorts of heart issues, right? When you have too much pressure in your body. So one of the first things you're usually told to do when you're on a heart-healthy diet is to cut back on your sodium intake. And in the past, when I used to talk about sodium, I think we were not quite where we are now with the amount of processed foods and restaurant meals we eat. I think we have definitely increased our intake of processed foods and restaurant foods over the past 20 years. So I used to think that what you add to foods with the salt shaker was the biggest source of sodium, because I think that's what the research said. But research now is saying that actually where most of our sodium is coming from is from packaged foods or processed foods and restaurant meals. Salt is still a big contributor of it. It always has been. But people need to get a little bit better about knowing what's in the food. I heard a comedian on our satellite radio talking about, the vaccine and how some people I don't know what's in it, I don't want to get it. And they were like, yeah, but do you eat American food? Like, how many times do we eat stuff and we have no idea what we're putting in our body, right? Because you look at that box and sometimes you just see a long label. And the older I get, the less able I am to read those words because they're so little and they're so long sometimes. If I don't have my glasses on, I can't see them, but we eat it anyways. So we do need to get better at looking at the sodium content in the foods that we eat. But with that being said, I get a lot of questions sometimes about the different salts that are out there. So, oh no, I'm getting distracted. If we go back to the lower sodium shopping list, the guidelines for sodium for healthy Americans is 2,300 milligrams a day. For heart health, the guideline is 2,000 milligrams, and that's the American Heart Association can oftentimes recommend going as low as 1,500 milligrams of sodium. So it's a huge difference. Now, on average, Americans consume 3,400 milligrams. So some people are consuming less and some people are consuming more. I think we're probably consuming more than 3,400, to be quite honest, because I look at the sodium in restaurant foods online, and I have seen things that have had 4,000 milligrams in one item. And so people don't know because they're at a restaurant. If you don't take the time to look it up, how are you going to know? You just know it tastes good, right? Because it tastes yummy. So in here about the Food and Drug Administration reports that over 70% of our sodium is coming from these packaged foods and restaurant meals. So that's kind of the purpose of this lower sodium shopping list that we're going to look at in a minute, because in it I've given you some guidelines for some foods, very brand specific, but also with the amount of sodium that's listed in them. So we'll come to this after we first look at salt. So obviously salt can be a big contributor of sodium. Now you have a handout that's called 5 types of salt, and I often get questions on, is this salt better than this salt? Can I use this salt or that salt? And quite honestly, I didn't know until I made this handout over the past 2 weeks. So it was a learning adventure for me. But on here, I've kind of lumped them into 5 different types, and within each type are different ones you might have heard of, because different ones get categorized. But for the most part, all of these salts are 97.5% sodium chloride, and the other 2.5% is something else. Now, the amount of sodium in a serving size can change a little bit because it depends on how big the granule is. So table salt is very small, and just like if you can pack it in more into a teaspoon than you could something like a kosher salt or a Himalayan pink salt that's more coarse and bigger. So tablespoon for tablespoon, it might have a different amount of sodium, but gram for gram, it's going to be pretty comparable if it was the same weight. So on this sheet, I've given you information about table salt, kosher salt, sea salt, and 2 different popular types of sea salt. And then on the back page is your mineral salts, which would be the pink Himalayan salt, and then flavored salts, which is kind of a new thing. But on each of them, I did list approximately how much sodium is in a teaspoon and also in 1/4 of a teaspoon. So you can see they're all still pretty high, you know. So what I tell people with salt is you sometimes don't know how much you're getting, you know, unless you're measuring it out. So it can be tricky. It's definitely wise to stop adding salt to the water when you cook your rice and your pasta. And it's always a good idea to taste your food before you salt it. A lot of food has the salt already in it, and it may not need that. I know some people, you know, as soon as you get your meal, you grab the salt shaker and start putting salt on it. Taste it first. Give yourself a chance to see if you like it without adding the salt, because a little bit of salt has quite a bit of sodium in it.
With the different types of salt, is one of these recommended for heart patients over the other, or doesn't make any difference?
Not from what I could tell. The one that said a benefit to it, let me see which one it was. The Celtic sea salt is the one that promised some health benefits, and that's the one that I've had, like, patients have asked me about Celtic sea salt, but I don't know if it's really researched enough to be it for me to say definitively, yes, have this salt over another one. I still feel like salt is salt, and you need to have as little as you need to just enhance the flavor, especially if you've got a heart condition. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions on the different types of salt?
I've had 3 cardiologists. Probably the youngest guy at the table, and he's retired, but he said it's in his clinic notes to eat high sodium diet, even though he knows I have fiber. You don't have to answer. It's not a question. It's just a statement.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't know if there was another reason, another medical thing that you might be losing more sodium. So like when I worked in the gym setting and I worked with athletes, you know, sometimes they sweat so much salt out that athletes have to take salt pills. So it can be different for different people, and there can be different conditions that might mean you need more salt. But without knowing, I don't know. Yeah.
I just want to make the statement.
Yeah. So that's definitely.
We're doctors out there.
Oh yeah, and sometimes it could be not correct information too.
Right.
So, you know, I don't know without looking at it.
Group. I just want to make the statement. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I like the interaction.
You know, now that he says that and I hear it, I remember being in basic training in the Army, and every hour on the hour we would stop and you'd have to take salt pills.
Yeah.
And that was in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where it was 120 degrees and you were sweating for 15 minutes.
So why would you need the salt pills? Because it helps you hold on to the fluid.
I don't know, but we had to.
It's for fluid retention. When you're sweating that profusely, you are losing so much water. And if you keep losing so much water, you're going to get dehydrated and have heat stroke. So the way to replenish water is to have something with sodium in it. That's what like Gatorade and Pedialyte, when you get diarrhea or you're throwing up and you're getting dehydrated and you need that water back in, you need the sodium to help bring it in. In the class we teach at the hospital, I always talk about the instant oatmeal, instant grits, and instant pudding. They have sodium in there. They've added sodium to the product because the purpose of that sodium is to draw the water into the product so it is ready in an instant, and you only have to wait a minute so you can eat it, right? Because it brings it in. Sodium in your body does the same thing. It's going to cause you to retain water. If you're sweating a lot, you need that water. If you're not sweating a lot, like me, if I have the sodium, I'm just going to get bloated, and I'm not going to be able to button my pants tomorrow, right? So it's a totally different experience. I've got to go run and sweat it out, I guess, more. So good comments. Anything else? What?
That's a good answer, thank you.
Okay. So the other thing that I brought out is information on salt substitutes. So you have some information on salt substitutes. So I could not find, I went to Kroger to try to find, some of them are listed on the back, the no salt and the new salt and the my salt substitute, but all I could find was low salt and Morton salt, which is like a combination. It's a salt substitute. So typically your salt substitutes, they use potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride to give food salty flavors, which sounds in theory like a good thing. You know, potassium is real important for the body. We get it from fruits and vegetables. You think of the healthy banana and the potato and things that have potassium in it. But the challenge when it comes to cardiac patients is if you are on certain medications that cause your body to retain or not lose as much potassium, you can develop high potassium levels, which can actually lead to heart attack. So you have to be really careful when you decide to use a salt substitute, and some of the common ones are listed on the back because of that potassium content. Most of the time when you get potassium from food, it's going to be just fine because you're getting it within the food. But you take something that's just a direct potassium chloride, and that could cause some issues. So I tell you this, this is not information like start using this in place of salt. This is be mindful. If one of these things seems like a good fit for you, talk to your doctor or your pharmacist to make sure. Now, for anybody who has any type of kidney disease, you do not want to be doing potassium chloride because the kidneys are responsible for filtering your blood. And if you end up taking too much potassium and your kidneys can't handle it, you're going to end up with too much potassium in your blood. So, and that can lead to a heart attack. So you don't want to overdo these salt substitutes. You have to be very, very careful with them. Has anybody been educated on salt substitutes before or been told to take them or not to take them? Or anybody tried them?
Yeah, tried them.
To know?
No.
It's not as flavorful as we think.
I've heard that too.
You what?
I've heard the same thing.
Yeah.
Nothing like salt.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Well, one thing to keep in mind, the FDA is starting to encourage manufacturers to use more potassium chloride in their foods because our sodium intake is so high. So I do think it's important to know that because you just don't, people don't know how to read those nutrition labels. And whenever they did the most recent nutrition label update, potassium is now listed on the label. And for the most part, we're supposed to get a lot of it. A healthy body can have, they recommend 3,500 to 4,700 milligrams of potassium, and nobody really ever gets that. So the idea of using potassium sounds like a good thing, unless you are taking one of these medications that's listed on the salt substitute page, or you have some kidney issues. That may increase the risk of the high potassium levels. So
but you're just talking about salt substitutes. You're not talking about vegetables and fruits that we
No.
eat.
No.
Oh.
But if I was working with someone who is like end-stage renal disease, sometimes we even have to limit those, the foods that have the potassium in it at the end-stage renal disease, not on dialysis usually. So, but that's usually very far down the road. Yes?
Besides my calcium deposits on my heart, I also have liver disease, and I've heard that potassium and vitamin K2 and vitamin D are good. So mentioned potassium, so I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, okay. I don't have any other comments to make. I mean, vitamin D is usually, a lot of people are deficient in it, so finding out what your vitamin D level is. I'm deficient in vitamin D. I just got put on a supplement a couple months ago again, you know, because I got it up and then I stopped taking my supplement and then I went back down. So I'll find out in a couple months, is it back up again? So those are all things to think about. And, you know, to find, you know, to have a conversation with your doctor about it. Okay, so information on salt substitutes for you all. And then the third thing I have here is the lower sodium shopping list. So I kind of already briefly did the first part of this handout, but there's a lot of different ways to cut back on sodium if you're getting too much. Now, of course, the first thing I tell everybody is a good exercise is to find out how much sodium you get. And to do that, the only way to do that is to look at those nutrition labels and log it, write it down. So writing stuff down can be very eye-opening, and it's not just supposed to be torture for food tracking or make you feel guilty. It's to give you information that you can make decisions with. When you think about other areas where you might write down stuff, if you're trying to save money, you might write down where you're spending money. If you're trying to learn a new course or something, you get homework where you write it down. When you write stuff down, you tend to remember it better too. So I think it's a really good exercise to find out what is your starting place for sodium, because even though the guidelines say 2,000 or 1,500 or 2,300, if you're getting 5,000 milligrams, to go from 5,000 to 2,000, that's really, really hard. Like, that is going to take a lot of effort and a lot of energy, and you're probably going to get burned out on it before you even get there, you know, and you're going to just say, forget it, I can't do this. So I would say the best thing to do is start by tracking how much sodium you get, and to do this, you look at the label, you look at the serving size at the top, you measure out that, you see, is that your portion? If it's not, you add more or you take away some, and then you do the calculation necessary to find out how much sodium is in that. If you eat out, you go to that restaurant webpage. You look it up online. You say, oh, I'm having the, you know, Chick-fil-A. I just left Chippenham. I'm going to go grab some Chick-fil-A downstairs, right? I'm going to see what's in my, you know, chicken sandwich and french fries. Oh, wow, it's 1,600 milligrams. I don't know if that's it or not. I'm making it up right now. But you look it up and then you see, what do I really get? And then once you determine what you get, if it's 5,000, then you look at what you're doing and you pick one or two things to change. And you try to make it 4,500. Once you get there, you pick one or two more things to change, you bring it down to 4,000. When you do it like that more slowly, you're going to be more likely to be able to stick with it. It takes a lot of time to find new foods to try. And so that's one thing to think about. So then once you figure out how much you're getting, if you determine you need to cut back, here are some tips on ways you can cut back. So anytime you choose a natural food versus a processed food, it's probably going to have less sodium in it. If it's in a box with a label, it probably has more sodium than the apple that doesn't have a label. So choosing more fresh foods is going to be one way to cut back on sodium. You can also, if you're looking at that nutrition facts panel and you like using those, looking at the percentages that are on that far side, that percent daily value, looking for things that is 5% would be low in sodium. If it's above 20%, it's high in sodium. So you can use that as a guide to say, okay, I'm not going to have anything that's above, that says 20% or more, or I'm going to only have something that's 10% or less. So you can use that percent daily value. You can also look for label cues. So manufacturers have are able to use things called nutrient content claims, but those things there are legal food laws related to using that. So if I say I have a low sodium snack, that snack has to first of all be a certain portion size. I can't make my portion size of the snack so small to make me have so little sodium in it, right? So if I said I had a low sodium potato chip, that serving size has to be 1 ounce. And then it has to have less than a certain amount of sodium in there. So the nutrient content claims related to sodium are listed on this sheet. So if something says it's low sodium, that means it has less than 140 milligrams of sodium in it. If it's very low sodium, it has less than 35 milligrams. If it is salt or sodium free, it has less than 5 milligrams of sodium. If it says reduced sodium, that just means it has 25% less than the regular item has. So something like a deli meat. You've got deli meats are loaded with sodium. They have like 700 milligrams of sodium in a 2-ounce portion. If you get a reduced sodium deli meat, that one might have 300 or 400 milligrams. It doesn't have nothing in it. You know, it just has less. It has to be reduced by at least 25%. If it says light in sodium or lightly salted, that means it contains at least 50% less sodium. And then unsalted or no salt added just means they didn't add salt to it. The product could still have sodium in it, because no salt was added to it. So some things to keep in mind as you're looking at labels and looking for menu cues. On the bottom of this page, there is a website, the Healthy Heart Market. This is a website that's been around before Amazon and for all the online shopping, but this was a family who was impacted by heart disease and found it's really hard to find low sodium foods. So they made their own little market for it. And a lot of times I'll go on that just to get ideas of what I can buy at Kroger or Wegmans or Publix or wherever you shop, Food Line, Walmart. You can get ideas for low sodium things by going to that website and checking it out, because it's all different brands. Or you can order from them and pay shipping and have it shipped to you as well. But that might give you some, different ideas of things to try with flavor. Their email is on there, and they have a phone number, and they'll mail you a catalog if you don't have computer access, so you can look up something. So then, are there any questions about that first page? Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that I sat in on a number of your home health care classes.
Yeah.
Talking about healthy diet, and probably the one thing that has made the most impact on me as somebody who eats a lot of soup.
Okay.
When you're listening to that 695 or 895 milligrams of sodium in the soup, I never realized it until I sat in your class that's per serving, and the soup can has 2 servings in it.
Yeah.
So you have to multiply that number by 2 to understand how much sodium you're really consuming if you eat the entire can of soup.
Yeah.
It's
very, very eye-opening, even for me as a dietitian. Like, people are like, how much sodium do you think is in that? And I'm like, I honestly have no idea. Like, let's look at it and see. I bought the instant chocolate pudding to do like a layer cake for my kid's birthday. You have like the cake and then the pudding and the whipped cream and the Heath bar and the cake and the pudding. I eat like good food too. But I bought the instant pudding because I always bought the instant pudding. And I'm now working in cardiac rehab, so I'm suddenly very aware of how much sodium. I'm not working with athletes anymore. I didn't care about sodium when I worked in the gym because everybody was sweating, right? So now I'm in cardiac rehab, and I start looking at the sodium in it. It was over 400 milligrams of sodium in that instant chocolate pudding per serving. I was like, holy moly, that's like worse than a lot of things, So you just don't know until you start looking at it. And it really can be eye-opening. And I really think that people need to be conscious to make informed food decisions, especially if you've just gone through cardiac stuff. Like, any opportunity you have to learn it, at least give it a shot. I mean, you say, I'm going to try it, I don't like it. I'm going to try it again, I don't like it. Eventually you might say, that's not a change I'm willing to make. But at least you tried, and at least you're aware of what you're putting in your body. So, but yeah, soup can be loaded, deli meats can be loaded. There's a lot of things that can be surprising. So the rest of this shopping list basically takes you through all the different sections of the grocery store. I originally made this shopping list when I worked for UCROPS. I was a UCROPS dietitian. I used it before the internet, had all the information out there. I was tasked with going down every single aisle and writing down different nutrient requirements so we could make these shopping lists for people. It was very tedious, very, very tedious. This was tedious too, going back online and looking up everything, but not as tedious as going to the grocery store. I would spend hours there writing stuff down. But I've basically gone through each of the different sections to give you some suggestions for ways you can choose lower sodium foods in there. And then when we get to certain things like like cheese, because cheese is high in sodium, you know, something if you like Swiss cheese does not have near as much sodium as the other cheeses. So that's like kind of a tip. You can always do probably any brand of Swiss cheese and you'll get less. But I've listed some of the ones that are in the Boar's Head product. And I'm not trying to be a Boar's Head snob, but Boar's Head was the only, if anybody finds a manufacturer that has some no added salt, really low sodium deli meats out there, not the reduced sodium, but the really low salt sodium deli meats, let me know, because I looked at several different websites and I could still only come up with 3 options that are by Boar's Head. And those 3 are listed in here too. They make a low sodium roast beef, a no added salt turkey, and a no added salt roast beef. And the amounts of sodium is accurate as of last week when I looked them all up. So, so it's pretty current stuff right now. There is some things about bread on here too, some brands of bread that are on the lower side. A lot of people don't think about sodium being in your bread. Bagels are really high in sodium, so I would encourage you look at those bread labels and see what's in it, and maybe try something different on here. There are some cereals also listed here for you, and then it goes into some other things on there. On page 5 is a section on seasoning. So this is where you want to try to be thinking about how can you add flavor to food so you don't have to add as much salt. And that's where seasonings come into place. Now I grew up with like hamburgers, hot dogs, macaroni and cheese, you know, sloppy-joes, tacos, you know, with all the seasoning mixes. My mom didn't like cook with fresh herbs and stuff like that, so I didn't know how to do that. Like, I didn't even know that you could make soup. I always thought it came in a can. I was like, who makes soup? How would you even do that? You know, I thought it just came in a can. So, so on here, these are some of the flavors that probably can be used to add more flavor to foods, and they might be things that are in foods you like, you just didn't know what it was. So I find things like ginger. I've learned I love anything with ginger. Does anybody else love ginger here? It's in a lot of Asian dishes. Really good flavor. Obviously garlic is a great flavor. All the Italian food out there has so much good yummy garlic in it. So thinking about those fresh foods, when you heat up or you have like sauteed peppers and onions, that gives really good flavor to food, and you don't usually have to use any salt to get that flavor out. Just cooking things can bring out some good flavors. And so on here are a list of different seasonings to try. There are blends out there. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of Danos. I'll pass it around if you want to look at it. It's an interesting website. I saw it, I was trying to do maybe a healthy barbecue. I don't even think I was trying to do something healthy. I think my son wanted me to do some ribs or do some barbecue or something, and the recipe was advertising this Danos. So I bought it not knowing that it was like a low sodium product. It was just like an TikTok or Instagram like video sensation. But this guy has really become quite popular with all the influencers out there, and he makes some low sodium spices. I found that at Kroger. They had original just today at Kroger. They had that one in spicy, but I have the original at home, so I didn't want to bring anything that's opened here. So Danos is a brand you may not know about. A lot of people know about Mrs. Dash, you know, and they have a ton of different ones out there. This is their table blend, so I'm imagining that is like shake it on your food instead of salt. And so you can see this doesn't have any sodium and only a little bit of potassium, so it's not a potassium chloride substitute. It's just whatever's in the food.
So what time is dinner?
Has anybody ever tried nutritional yeast?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nutritional yeast?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you like it?
I sprinkle it on popcorn.
Yeah, that's what, this is new to me. I bought this today, I'm gonna try it, and I see it in things. So I've always talked about nutritional yeast because if you're vegan and you're looking for like something to replace Parmesan cheese, this would be a vegan-friendly food that has a cheesy flavor. What I didn't know until I did all the stuff on here is it only has 10 milligrams of sodium in a tablespoon. So it's also low sodium. So I don't know, if we had something to sprinkle it on, we could sprinkle it on something on your plate. I could open it up and you could try it. I've never tried it before, but there's information on there. I actually put nutrition information under seasonings and what people use it for, because it could be something you put on your pasta instead of Parmesan cheese, because pasta has a lot of sodium with the sauce that's in it, and depending on what you put, and then if you like sprinkle Parmesan cheese, that has a lot of sodium. So you could try it. You said you like it on popcorn? Yeah, it gives it a cheesy flavor, so I don't know. But we can open it tonight and try it, and you can see.
It tastes a little salty too.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, that's
Yeah.
what, everything I've read.
You never know that it didn't have salt in it.
Yeah, I assumed.
It tastes like you said, Parmesan.
Yeah, I assumed it was going to have salt in it. So when it came up, when I was doing stuff for this class tonight, I was like, oh. And so I saw it at the grocery store today. So
Where did you buy that?
I got this at Kroger.
Not your
I just got
crops?
it at Kroger.
Not your crops?
Yeah, no, Ukrops isn't here anymore. I know. They would have it. If Ukrops was here, they would have it. I know they would have it. So anyways, we can open it up. Y'all can sprinkle it on your plate and, nothing else, try it on your fingers, see if you like it. So anyways, are there any questions? Yeah.
Well, I guess more of a comment than a question, but I want to do a lot of baking.
The what?
Baking.
Baking?
Cookies, cakes, pies.
Yeah.
And you cannot bake anything without butter, sugar, teaspoon of salt, and pretty much every recipe you see, no matter what you're baking, you got to use those ingredients if you want it to taste okay.
Right. And that's true, because baking is a science. So you start changing out, like if we have time, and I don't know if we have time or not, to go into the sweets and the sugar substitutes, or come back another time and do that. But like you can't bake with a lot of the sugar substitutes. It's not gonna have the same.
What's called for in the recipe.
The what?
It has to be what's called for in the recipe.
Yes.
For the taste good.
Yes. And I mean, if you put too much salt or not enough salt in it, it's, they say cooking you have more flexibility. You can do a little bit of less, because just science, but not baking. You sometimes have similar ingredients in bread and cake, but they're two very different things, right? So, yes.
I've always heard too that, they say that you should rinse all your canned vegetables before you actually cook them.
Well, you will get rid of some of the sodium if you have a canned vegetable that has sodium in it. If you're getting ones that's no added salt, then I just like to rinse them anyway.
Right.
But yeah, rinsing things off. And right now, like if you have stuff in your house, food is so expensive. Do not throw that food away. Figure out a way to eat it in a healthy way. Plan to have that unhealthy thing, whether it's just a little bit, but don't throw it away because food's way too expensive. Yes.
Do you feel that salt and sodium is more concerning for heart health than fat content?
Well, it depends on the person, too. I think both of them are important. So when it comes to fat, your saturated fat is what's going to, if you get too much of it, that's what's going to raise your LDL cholesterol levels, and that leads to a tendency for plaque to start building up in your arteries. And so that can then cause the arteries to become more narrow, and then you have some issues down the road. You might need a stent or bypass or have a heart attack or things like that. Sodium is important for regulating the fluid volume and blood pressure. So they're both important, and usually it just depends. If somebody's arteries look really good, like their cholesterol levels are fine and everything's come back as clear, then I'll usually focus more on sodium. Like if it's a valve replacement surgery and they have clear arteries, I'll focus on sodium. But a lot of times it's both, because a heart patient, really anybody in the room who has a heart would benefit from a heart healthy diet, because these things don't happen overnight. They're like an accumulation of what we've done over time. So, I think the sooner you can start making positive changes that benefit your blood, basically, and what's in your body, sometimes things can be reversed a little bit. Did that answer your question? Okay.
I was at a meeting first meeting was a couple months ago, and Joe is my contact. But I'm, I don't know, special. It's just a comment. But I had cancer 30 years ago, and I had chemotherapy, and they x-rayed my heart. My cholesterol's been fine, but my heart has plaque because of the x-rays. So it's a different, everybody cares about cholesterol, but there's another group of us that have had x-rays to our heart, and that's another reason that we can get plaque.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but I agree with you, diet is key.
Yeah.
No comment necessary. I just wanted to announce to the group.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many different medical situations and circumstances. And I know when I'm meeting with somebody one-on-one, like as a class, I have to be a little more broad strokes. But one-on-one, like if you're dealing with diabetes, that's going to be part of what I have to consider. What is the most important change you can make right now? Usually it's the change you're willing to make. That's the change that's most important, because it doesn't matter if I think you should do something. If you're not willing to do it, we're all wasting each other's time. So if I can find something that sounds like, yes, that's a good change, and help encourage you to do it, you might feel a little bit better, and then you might come back and say, I'm ready to take another change. What do you suggest next? And then we talk about what that is. So.
By the way, I'd like to say that they pronounced me cured after 5 years. So.
You're what? I'm sorry?
They pronounced me cured of cancer. So.
Yay! All right, that's worth it.
Now I'm a mending heart. I'm in love with all of you.
Well, that must be a relief. That's quite a lot you've been through. Do you have a question?
I just wanted to ask if you would like to provide refreshments for our next meeting in September. Especially at Chippenham Hospital.
You probably don't want me to.
Pam, we provide all ingredients of your seasoning fresh.
So what?
When you cook it, we'll bring you the fresh seasoning.
I have learned quite a bit about cooking over the years. I'm not a good cook by any means, I wouldn't say, compared to good cooks. The thing that helped me the most was actually when my son was gluten-free, and we were gluten-free, and I hated every minute until I embraced it. But that's when I actually learned how to appreciate other flavors and textures and things like that. And so sometimes we're going through things and we don't know why until we get through them and we look back and we see what we learned from it, and we see maybe where we impacted it. You know, like I really, really hated gluten-free. I was a grocery store dietitian. I would have to take people on gluten-free store tours, and I was like, I don't have a clue about this. They know way more than me, and I'm trying to point out what they can eat. I haven't lived in their shoes. I don't know this. And so, you know, lo and behold, God sometimes gives you what you need. So I had a child that was gluten intolerant, and I learned a lot about the gluten-free diet. And, you know, and that it really, I feel like that was a changing point for me for becoming a better dietitian. And so, you know, I don't know why everybody in this room has to be dealing with heart challenges or heart surgeries or heart events and things like that. But I do know that we all learn and grow when you go through trials and hardships, and sometimes we might be resistant to making changes until we finally embrace them. But the mind is really powerful, and I think once you embrace certain things, it changes your outlook. So I hope tonight, I don't know that we have time to go into sugar or not, so I kind of feel like we're probably good. Yeah, I kind of figured I had too much, so I wanted to do salt first because I think that's such an important part of salt, of heart health. And so maybe you guys can invite me back and we'll do sugar another time. I had some goodies up there to show you some of the sweeteners out there and stuff, but like again, everything, there is some caution with almost all of them. So if you're thinking about some of these sweeteners, I'm not necessarily promoting them. I'm just saying, remember, everything in moderation is usually the way it works out. If some is good, more is not usually better. So anyways, thank you guys for having me. I hope you guys got some information.
And we will ask you back for the sugar. You you have a portfolio from your previous visit, we have a different one.
Oh,
So you
thank
can
you.
remember us twice
Oh,
now.
thank you. Well, if you have me back again, you don't need to give me anything else.
We'll have something for you.
Thank you, that's nice, I love that.
Have some food. We're gonna take about a 5-10 minute break.
And if anybody wants to try this, I'm happy to open it and sprinkle some on your plate.
We have some snacks over there, you can put in this